My name is Daniel, just a simple and sad American man, divorced. But this story is not about me and my problems, but a Japanese guy I met in a small Japanese bar in New York. The warm glow of lanterns, the gentle hum of conversation in the background, and the delicate aroma of sushi mingling with the sharp scent of sake made the world outside feel distant. It had been my second bottle of sake that night. I wasn't a heavy drinker by any means, but those days, well, I was trying new things. They say you're supposed to after a divorce. Do things you've never done before, shake up the routine, step out of your comfort zone. So, that's what I had been doing. I had started coming to this bar, soaking up the unfamiliar atmosphere, hoping it would wash away the remnants of my old life. Funny how, after something like a divorce, everything seemed so foreign, even yourself. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, wondering how I had ended up where I was. The bar wasn't busy that night, but there was just enough of a crowd to make the place feel alive. As I lifted the small ceramic cup to my lips, savoring the clean, burning warmth of the sake, the door to the bar opened. A man walked in, Japanese, late 40s maybe, with an air of quiet confidence that immediately drew attention. He exchanged a few words with the bartender in rapid Japanese, and moments later, he was sitting beside me, ordering his own sake and sushi. For some reason, he stood out. Maybe it was the calmness in his face, the kind of calm that only comes from someone who had been through storms and survived. He glanced at me, catching my eye, and with a small nod, raised his glass in a silent toast. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low and unhurried, as if we had known each other for years. I chuckled, taking another sip of my drink. "Something like that. Rough couple of months, actually." He smiled slightly, understanding without needing any more details. That was the thing about those encounters. No one needed the full story. Sometimes it was enough to just be around someone who understood. "Divorce," I finally said, letting the word hang in the air. It was fresh, not easy to shake off. The man nodded, setting his sack cup down gently. "I know. Divorce feels like the end of everything, but it's just the end of a chapter." He took a slow breath, his gaze drifting toward the bar, as if lost in thought. "I went through it." His words hovered between us, drawing me in. There was something in the way he spoke, with a quiet intensity that made me want to listen. I poured myself another cup of sake, turning slightly toward him. This all happened 10 years ago in Kyoto, in a similar bar to this. It had been 2 hours since I arrived at the bar to meet my best friend Takashi for another round of drinks. The air felt heavier than usual, and Takashi, normally so talkative, had barely said a word all night. By the time the clock struck 11 p.m., something in his expression told me he had finally made a decision. Then he opened his mouth to speak. "Actually, your wife, it seems like she's having an affair," he said, the words dropping like a weight into the silence between us. For a moment, my mind went blank. There was no way. My wife and I were childhood friends, inseparable since our earliest days. We had known each other longer than anyone else. She couldn't betray me like that. But when I confronted her later that night, she admitted it so easily, her voice calm, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, I did. I'm sorry," she said, her eyes steady but tired. Just like that, we decided to get a divorce. On the day she left, she turned to me at the door and with a small, bittersweet smile said, "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry." At the time, I thought she was apologizing for the affair, but later, after everything was over, I realized the true meaning behind her words, the real reason she had agreed to the divorce so quickly. My wife and I grew up next door to each other. Our families were close, and from kindergarten onward, we were more like siblings than friends. One day when we were still children, she grinned at me and said, "Let's get married when we grow up." I had laughed it off, thinking it was just a silly thing kids say, never imagining that one day it might actually happen. In middle school, everything changed. She became popular, her warm and sunny personality drawing everyone to her like a magnet. I stayed firmly in the childhood friend zone. One of my friends even joked, "Hey, if you don't hurry up, someone else is going to snatch her up." Panicking, I confessed my feelings to her at the end of our first year of middle school. To my surprise, she said yes. We started dating, and years later, when we were both 25, we got married. It's amazing, isn't it? Marrying my first love? "If only I could go back and tell my kindergarten self," she had said, beaming with joy. We had been married for 5 years when the affair happened. But before that, I thought our life together was perfect. I can confidently say I was a devoted husband. She always had a way of making me happy, like when she would pat my head whenever I was feeling down. Those little gestures, her constant kindness, were what made me fall even deeper in love with her. We had talked about having kids someday, but we were still in the if we're lucky phase, enjoying the time as just the two of us. Whenever I brought it up, she would laugh and say, "You really love me, don't you? You're going to be jealous when we have kids, aren't you?" Then, one Sunday afternoon, we were lounging on the couch, watching variety shows, when she suddenly grimaced and said, "Sorry, my stomach hurts a bit." Concerned, I asked, "Are you okay? Should we go to the hospital?" But she brushed it off. "Nah, it's just for a little while. I'll be fine," she said, as tough as ever. Over the next few days, though, her condition seemed to get worse. I wanted to insist that we go to the hospital, but she was so confident, always putting on a brave face, that I hesitated. After a week, she finally agreed to go, just to be safe. I offered to take the day off to go with her, but she smiled and said, "It's nothing to worry about. You go to work and do your best." Reluctantly, I left for work that day, but I couldn't focus. I spent the entire time worrying about her, feeling guilty for not being there. When I got home that evening, I saw her smiling again. "It was just a stomach ache," she said brightly. "I'm sorry for worrying you." Relief washed over me. I ordered some expensive sushi to celebrate, watching her eat with such happiness. I teased her, and she teased me back, like nothing had changed. For a moment, I thought everything had returned to normal, but little did I know that moment was the beginning of the end. It was around the time I had almost forgotten about the stomach pain, when my wife began going out more frequently with her close friend Yukiko. They had known each other since elementary school. I didn't really know Yukiko back then, as we were rarely in the same class. But in middle school, we ended up in the same track and field club, and eventually started hanging out more often. I remember playfully competing over who was closer to my wife. As my wife's trips became more frequent, I started to wonder if she just wanted to spend more time with her best friend now that she felt more secure about traveling. It didn't really bother me though. In fact, I came to enjoy the sight of her coming home with souvenirs from various places, always beaming with stories of her travels. One day she told me she was planning a week-long trip, 7 nights and 8 days, with Yukiko. "That's quite a long trip," I remarked, and she excitedly showed me her travel magazine, filled with sticky notes. I figured there'd be more interesting souvenirs this time around, so I sent her off with a smile on the day of her departure, quietly looking forward to the stories she'd bring back. The weekend after she left, a local friend invited me out for drinks. There were 4 of us, all guys, and we'd known each other since middle school. Naturally, the conversation turned to my wife, as they all knew her. "How's she doing?" "You're still as crazy about her as ever, right? I bet she feels the same about you." "I can't even imagine you two ever breaking up." Everyone teased me, asking for updates, and perhaps because I was tipsy, I found myself gushing about how much I loved her. But one guy didn't join in much, my best friend, Takashi. Normally, he's the life of the party, but that night, he was unusually quiet. We wrapped up after 2 hours, and as we walked toward the station, Takashi pulled me aside and whispered, "Hey, you want to grab another drink? Just the 2 of us?" I thought it was strange, but my curiosity got the better of me, so I agreed. We found a quiet bar and clinked glasses, but Takashi stayed silent for a long time. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place, so I waited patiently for him to speak. 2 hours had passed when he finally broke the silence, hesitating at first, as if gauging my reaction. "I saw her, walking with another guy. Your wife. I think she's cheating on you." For a moment, it felt like my heart stopped, but almost immediately, I forced myself to stay calm. "There's no way," I thought. "I love her, and I trust her completely. And I know she feels the same about me." Takashi had been there, watching us all this time, even teasing us for being a lovey-dovey couple. So how could he doubt her over something as simple as seeing her with another man? It felt like he was calling my beloved wife an easy woman, and anger flared up inside me. "You've always been like this, haven't you? Always looking at things from the wrong angle. You need to stop," I spat at him, my voice rising. Fueled by alcohol and frustration, I stormed out of the bar, leaving him behind. What happened after that is a bit of a blur. I think I kept muttering complaints about Takashi both on my way home and once I got there. The alcohol was heavy in my system, but I knew I had to calm down. Just then, a notification came through online. My foggy vision barely managed to focus on the screen, and to my surprise, the message was from Yukiko. She was supposed to be on the trip with my wife, so I didn't think much of it. Without any hesitation, I opened the message. But the moment I read the contents, the alcohol drained from me in an instant. I wasn't sure whether to tell you, but I decided you should know. She's cheating on you. My eyes widened as I stared at the message. Along with it was a photo of my wife entering a hotel with a man. More screenshots followed, pictures from Instagram, subtle clues of her infidelity. I'd never seen her Instagram before, but it was clear enough. There were photos of her having meals with some man, pictures that seemed to tell a story I didn't want to believe. I felt the blood drain from my body, leaving me cold and hollow. So, this is what they mean by blood running cold. My thoughts spiraled. Why? How could this happen? I thought we would be together forever. Those questions echoed endlessly in my head as I passed the days in a daze, waiting for her to return from the trip. When she finally walked through the door, it was like nothing had changed. "I'm home! Are you here?" she called out, her usual cheerful voice filling the house. She smiled, unloading bags of souvenirs as she excitedly started recounting stories of her trip with Yukiko. "And then Yukiko did this," she continued, without noticing my silence. Normally she talks a lot, but this time she didn't seem to care that I wasn't responding. She just kept going, non-stop. I had never seen her force a conversation this much, as if trying to fill the silence with meaningless chatter. It made me wonder, was she pretending everything was fine, or had she already realized that I knew about the affair and was trying to act normal? Watching her go on and on, I started to feel like she was forcing herself, that it was all an act. I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop it," I said, cutting her off. "You don't have to pretend. I already know everything." "Well, what are you talking about?" she stammered. "You cheated on me, didn't you? Just tell me the truth." Her expression shifted. For a moment, she looked almost relieved. "Oh, you knew?" she sighed. "Yeah, I cheated." It was like a blow to the chest, hearing the words come out of her mouth. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to get angry or yell. In that moment, despite everything, I realized something. I still loved her, even now. But I couldn't bear to say anything else. I locked myself in my room for the rest of the night. After that, we tried to go back to our normal life, but something was always off. We couldn't sync up the way we used to. The once bright smile on my wife's face was gone too, probably because I was avoiding her. The shock of her betrayal made it impossible for me to look at her properly. More than the affair itself, what hurt the most was the loss of the days when we could laugh together, openly, without holding anything back. The thought that we might never get those days back was unbearable. If that was truly the case, then maybe it was time to let go. Once I made the decision, everything moved quickly. A few days later, I told my wife I wanted a divorce. She didn't seem particularly surprised, and without any resistance, she signed the divorce papers. "I can't imagine you two ever splitting up." The words someone once said to me echoed in my mind, like a reel of memories. I couldn't imagine it either, even now. We had spent so much time coming together, growing close, yet divorce felt so simple, so quick. The thought made me unbearably sad. Fighting back the tears, I looked at my wife's face for the first time in what felt like ages and spoke what was in my heart. "If we stay like this, neither of us will be happy. Please, put your happiness first." In the end, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. I wanted her to find happiness, even if it wasn't with me. "If someone better comes along, I'll forgive you. Just get remarried and be happy." The divorce was finalized and my wife moved out. On the day she left, as she stood at the door, she thanked me, simply saying, "I'm sorry. Thank you for everything." With those words, she left. But just before the door closed completely, she turned back one last time. "Let's meet again someday," she murmured, her smile, somehow, more unforgettable than any I'd ever seen before. I stood there, unable to respond, trying to grasp the meaning behind her words and that smile. All I could do was stand there, frozen, bewildered. From that day on, I buried myself in work, hoping to forget her. I must have looked pathetic to anyone watching. I even started attending the drinking parties I used to avoid by saying, "My wife's waiting for me at home." News of my divorce spread through the office quickly. It's an old-fashioned company, the kind that thinks you can't get promoted unless you have a stable home life. I decided it was time to leave. I moved out of town and took a new job in a rural government office. I'd heard more people were relocating to the countryside, so it didn't seem unusual. More than anything, I just wanted to get away from the town where everything reminded me of her. After the divorce, work was all I had. I threw myself into my new job, working tirelessly. 6 months passed, and the pain from her betrayal had dulled somewhat. I had settled into my new life. But one Sunday, when I was least expecting it, the doorbell rang. I rarely had visitors. I wasn't antisocial, but my interactions with colleagues were limited to shared lunches, and I didn't have anyone close enough to meet up with on weekends. Who could it be? I opened the door and was met with an unexpected sight. Yukiko. I was stunned. I hadn't been in contact with her since that fateful message revealing the affair. Somehow, I had wanted her to be on my wife's side, not mine. She was the one who exposed the infidelity, but I believed she had done it for my wife's sake, out of concern for her. I tried to ask why she had come, but the moment our eyes met, Yukiko broke down in tears. I had never seen her cry like that before. She started apologizing over and over, and I was completely lost. I didn't know what to make of the situation. Not wanting to cause a scene in front of the neighbors, I invited her in. For a man living alone, my small one-room apartment was surprisingly tidy. I thought she might at least compliment how clean my apartment was, but Yukiko just sat there, still crying, endlessly apologizing. "Hey Yukiko, calm down. Here, have some coffee," I said, handing her a freshly brewed cup, trying to ease the tension. She sniffled for a while, but after taking a sip, she seemed to regain some composure. She looked directly at me and pulled out an envelope from her bag, handing it over. For a moment, I wondered if she was asking for compensation. But when I took it and looked at it, the envelope had the words, "To my dearest," written on it in handwriting I had seen countless times since middle school. It was my wife's handwriting. My heart began to race as I opened the letter with trembling hands. The letter began with these words, "To you, I know you must think it's cruel of me to ask how you're doing after everything I've put you through. But there's something I absolutely need to tell you, so please read this until the end. Do you remember when I went to the hospital 5 years into our marriage, complaining of stomach pains? The truth is, back then the doctor told me I had pancreatic cancer. It was already quite advanced. He said I had, at most, 6 months left. When I heard the word cancer, I wasn't so much shocked for myself as I was for you. My first thought was, what would you do if you knew? But I already knew the answer. You would sacrifice everything for me, pushing yourself beyond your limits to take care of me. That's just who you are. If our roles were reversed, I know I'd do the same. More than anything, I couldn't stand the thought of seeing you so sad, so worried about me. When the doctor asked who he should notify in case of an emergency, I told him to contact only my parents. I decided to keep it from you. The trips with Yukiko weren't vacations. They were hospital visits. That week-long trip I took was actually a hospital stay. The treatments were hard, and trying to keep up the lie with the souvenirs and travel stories was exhausting. But every time I saw you listen so eagerly, smiling, I found the strength to continue. At the same time, though, I grew scared. I kept wondering, how much longer can I show you this smile? I didn't want you to see me deteriorate. I didn't want to burden you with that. So, I decided to lie. The worst lie I've ever told. I had Takashi and Yukiko help me stage an affair, to make you hate me, to make you feel like you could leave me without hesitation. We faked everything, even the Instagram posts. Those were all part of the plan. Yukiko and Takashi just went along with my selfish request, so please don't blame them. When I came home from the hospital that one time, and you said, "I already know everything," I was terrified. For a moment, I thought you'd found out the truth. But then, I realized the plan had worked, at least halfway. Except, you never got angry with me. You never hated me, no matter how much I tried to push you away. I know I can never erase the pain I've caused you, and I don't expect to be forgiven. But from the bottom of my heart, I'm so sorry. At this point, the paper was trembling in my hands. My heart pounded against my ribs as I tried to absorb the meaning of the words. The room felt heavy with everything she had hidden from me, with all the lies she'd spun, not to hurt me, but to protect me from her own pain. I looked at Yukiko, who was still sitting across from me, her face wet with tears. And suddenly, it all made sense. Everything. The trips, the distance, even the affair. It was all a fabricated escape from a reality too painful for her to share. I suppose I should have told you directly, and apologizing like this in a letter doesn't show much sincerity. But please, allow me to apologize. There's one last thing I need to say. You always praised me for my smile, saying it gave you strength. But I want you to know that seeing your happy face was what sustained me through life. From the first moment we met, I've loved you. Ever since kindergarten, when we promised we'd get married one day, you've been the only one for me. You didn't take it seriously back then, but I meant it, even as a child. As time passed and you never confessed, I grew restless. So when we finally started dating in middle school, I was over the moon. And when we got married, well, I never thought such happiness could be possible. I truly believed it would last forever. I wanted to spend more time with you. I wanted to show you more of my smiles, to see yours in return. I dreamed of the two of us one day holding our own children together, but I'll leave that dream to someone else, someone who will walk by your side in my place. Don't worry, you're a wonderful person, and I'm sure you'll find someone even better than me. So please, from now on, think of your own happiness first. I'll always be praying for it. Tears blurred the rest of the letter. Beside me, Yukiko, who had been reading along, began to cry once more, her earlier tears resurfacing. Yukiko tried to speak through her sobs, her voice breaking as she explained. According to her, my wife had immediately consulted both her and Takashi after her cancer diagnosis. It had been Yukiko's wish to help fulfill my wife's request, no matter how painful. I told her at the start she should just tell you everything, but she wouldn't hear of it. She was so stubborn about it, Yukiko said, wiping her tears with a bitter smile. In the end, I had to go along with her. I couldn't say no. But as it turned out, Sachiko hadn't been able to come up with the whole plan by herself. Most of it had been Takashi's idea, Yukiko explained. She had acted on his guidance, which explained that strange conversation we'd had after the drinking party. Takashi had played his role, even though he must have been conflicted the entire time. I regretted the harsh words I had said to him that night. I hadn't spoken to him since, but now wasn't the time to dwell on that. First, there was her. Now that I knew the truth, I couldn't just leave it as it was. I had to see her, needed to see her, to hold her in my arms, even if I couldn't see her smile again. I asked Yukiko where my wife was hospitalized, but she didn't answer. Instead, her face crumpled even more. She passed away. Yukiko's voice broke as she wept. She told me that after our divorce, my wife's condition deteriorated rapidly. The prognosis had been grim from the start, and when the treatments became too painful to bear, she switched to palliative care. She spent her final days peacefully at her parents' home. Then, just last month, her condition suddenly worsened, and she slipped away in her sleep. I couldn't respond. The words died in my throat, and I collapsed to the floor, my legs giving way beneath me. No tears came, no sound. I was hollow, as if every part of me had been drained of life. It felt like the world had ended. Yukiko, carefully watching me, continued to speak. During her illness, she often said she hoped you would forget about her soon and start a new family. This letter, she explained, had been found by her parents while they were going through her belongings in the hospital room. It had been tucked under the bed cover. She had written it, but perhaps never intended to give it to me. Her parents, not reading the contents, had kept it safe out of respect for her. It was only after her passing that Yukiko had convinced them to let her take it. Even until the end, my wife had wanted to uphold her lie, to protect me from the truth. But Yukiko, who had once celebrated us more than anyone, couldn't bear to leave things unresolved between us. So, she decided to visit me today. Thanks to her, I finally understood my wife's feelings. I thanked Yukiko weakly, barely able to stand, and saw her off as she left, still worried about me. And then, after Yukiko was gone, I cried through the night. The sadness I felt upon learning of the affair and going through the divorce was nothing compared to this. It overwhelmed me, because now, she was truly gone. There was no way to fix things, no way to go back. In the weeks that followed, I existed in a fog, not knowing if I was alive or dead inside. The thought of following her crossed my mind more than once, but as time passed, I realized I couldn't. There was no way I could betray her last wish like that. She had wanted me to live, to be happy. Around that time, Yukiko started visiting me regularly. "This place is so nice, isn't it?" she said one day, smiling brightly. "Maybe I'll move here too." Her attempts at humor, her frequent visits to this rural town, made me think she was a bit of an oddball, but her presence, her kindness, helped. She reached out to me every day, bringing home-cooked meals on weekends and sharing in the sadness with me. Slowly, thanks to her, I began to recover. It was her dedication, reminiscent of my wife's selflessness, that pulled me back to life. After about a year of this, Yukiko had become someone special. I couldn't imagine life without her, just as I once couldn't imagine life without my wife. When I admitted to her that I had only been able to get through it because of her, Yukiko confessed her own feelings. She told me that at first it was guilt over the lies she had helped with, but over time, it had grown into a desire to protect me, to be there for me. Hearing that, I made up my mind. I confessed my feelings to her, and she simply whispered, "Yes." But she added one condition. "You must never forget her, ever. That's all I ask." 1 year later, after a short period of dating, we were married, and soon after, we had a daughter. Holding our baby girl in my arms, I couldn't help but notice how much her bright smile resembled my wife's, a smile that seemed to lift everyone around her. As I stood there, frozen, Yukiko noticed and asked, "What's wrong?" "I was thinking about her name," I said, showing Yukiko the name I had written on a piece of paper. "How about this?" The name I had chosen was Kaho, which means fragrance or blessing, and felt like a fitting tribute to my late wife, Sachiko, whose name meant child of happiness. In this way, it carried a piece of her essence into the future, as we started this new chapter of our lives. Yukiko smiled. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "May she grow up happy, carrying that spirit with her." And just like that, we named her Kaho. Not long after Kaho was born, I suggested we visit my wife's grave. Yukiko nodded, her eyes wet with tears. On the anniversary of her death, the three of us, Yukiko, Kaho, and I, went to her grave, bringing flowers and gifts from the local market. We placed them on the stone, and, as we stood there, I whispered, "Thank you. I will treasure the gift you gave me forever." I stood there, my hands clasped in prayer, tears quietly spilling down my cheeks. "Thank you," I said aloud, "for the happiness you brought into my life. Every day with you was a gift, and from now on, I will live those days again, with Yukiko and Kaho, for you." Just then, I felt a soft, ticklish sensation on my head. Was my expression that sad? The baby, cradled happily in Yukiko's arms, reached out with her tiny hand and stroked my hair, just like my wife used to do. It brought me back to a moment I thought I had lost forever. I sat there, my jaw dropped, realizing I was still holding the same cup of sake from the moment he had started his story. His words had left me in a daze, lingering in the quiet between us. For a moment, I thought about saying something, maybe offering words of comfort, or even just thanking him for sharing such a deeply personal part of himself. But the weight of his story felt too heavy, like I wasn't the right person to respond to such pain and grace. Without saying a word, I stood up, needing to escape the intensity of the moment. My thoughts were racing. His story had stirred something deep within me, a mix of guilt, regret, and something I didn't want to admit, a yearning for closure I hadn't found. "Excuse me, I need to make a phone call," I muttered, pushing my chair back and heading outside. The cool New York air hit my face like a wake-up call as I fumbled for my phone. I found myself staring at a number I hadn't touched in months, my ex-wife's. Why was I calling her? Was I looking for some kind of resolution? Did I expect some heartfelt confession, like the man's wife? Something to make sense of all the anger I had buried? My thumb hovered over the call button for longer than I'd like to admit. Finally, I pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, and then her voice, sharp and irritated, cut through the silence. "Hello, Daniel. Why are you calling me at this hour? Are you drunk?" Her tone stung, more than I'd expected it to. The bitterness was still there, sitting heavy in the space between us, even though we hadn't spoken in so long. Part of me wanted to apologize, to ask if we could ever find some common ground. Maybe the man's story had softened me just enough to believe that was possible. But then, her voice came again, impatient and cold. "Daniel, what do you want?" I paused, the words I had been searching for dying in my throat. "Just wanted to see if you were okay," I finally said, the words empty as they left my mouth. "Yeah, I'm fine. Now drop the damn phone and forget this number." The line went dead. No, she hadn't changed. She wasn't part of some tragic, misunderstood plan. She had cheated, and that was it.